Okay, let's dive into this. We usually think of these huge scientific breakthroughs as, these perfectly planned, flawlessly executed moments of genius. But what if I told you that one of the single biggest game changers in all of human history wasn't planned at all? In fact, it was a complete accident, born from a messy lab and a totally forgotten experiment. To really get how huge this story is, you have to try and imagine a world that's almost impossible for us to picture now. A world before 1928. In that world, something as simple as a scratch from a rose bush, or a sore throat, or a small wound on the battlefield, well, it could easily kill you. There just were no cures for bacterial infections. Period.
Yeah, this was the era of what they called microbe terror. If you got an infection, your survival pretty much depended on one thing and one thing only: how strong your own immune system was. Doctors could clean wounds, they could even amputate limbs, but once an infection really took hold, they were basically just helpless spectators.
This right here is the real horror of what people used to call blood poisoning, a condition we now know as sepsis. Hospitals, which were supposed to be places of healing, often ended up being more like graveyards where these infections would just spread like wildfire. It was an absolutely grim reality. But all of that was about to change, and it was all thanks to one famously untidy scientist.
So, let's meet our hero, Alexander Fleming. Now, Fleming was a brilliant bacteriologist working in London, but he was also, let's say, famous for having a spectacularly messy lab. And as it turns out, that very messiness would end up changing the world forever.
So, how did it all go down? Well, in September of 1928, Fleming gets back from a holiday and starts sifting through this pile of old petri dishes he'd left out. He notices one of them has been contaminated with a mold. Now, most researchers would have just grumbled and tossed it in the trash. But Fleming, he looked closer, and he saw something amazing. A perfectly clear kill zone all around the mold, a little circle where the bacteria had been completely wiped out. The mold was leaking something that was absolutely lethal to the germs.
He'd found what he first called mold juice, and he named the active substance penicillin. He had found the weapon. But here's the thing, and this is so important. Finding a weapon and actually knowing how to use it are two completely different things. The journey to a real, usable drug was only just getting started.
You see, Fleming's mold juice was incredibly fragile and unstable. He published his findings, sure, but he couldn't isolate the key ingredient. And honestly, the rest of the scientific world just didn't really get how huge this was. So for nearly a decade, one of the greatest discoveries in history just sat on a shelf. It was nothing more than a lab curiosity.
And this timeline here, it really shows that lost decade. For 10 whole years, nothing really happened. It actually took the urgency of World War II to bring penicillin back into the spotlight. A team down at Oxford University, led by two guys named Howard Florey and Ernst Chain, they dusted off Fleming's old research paper and decided to take on the massive challenge of turning this thing into a real drug. The very first patient was a policeman, Albert Alexander. He had this horrific infection that started from, get this, a simple scratch from a rose bush. He was covered in abscesses and he was close to death. They gave him the tiny amount of penicillin they had managed to produce, and the effect was, well, it was immediate and it was miraculous. He actually started to recover.
But here's where the story takes a tragic twist. The team's supply of this precious drug, it ran out. They got so desperate they were actually trying to filter it back out of his urine to give it to him again, but it just wasn't enough. The infection came roaring back, and Albert Alexander died. It was just a heartbreaking outcome, but it proved two things beyond any doubt. The drug was a miracle, and they had to find a way to make it by the gallon, not the drop.
So that desperate need for mass production, which was now a critical part of the Allied war effort, moved the whole project across the Atlantic. With the full backing of the U.S. government, the hunt was on for an industrial-scale solution. And the breakthrough they were looking for? Well, it came from a pretty unexpected place, a grocery store in Peoria, Illinois.
The researchers in Peoria made two huge discoveries. First, they found that a waste product from corn milling called corn steep liquor made the molds grow 10 times faster. But the real game changer came from a lab assistant nicknamed Moldy Mary. Her whole job was just to find more potent molds. And boy, did she. She found one on a rotten cantaloupe she picked up at a local market.
That one specific strain of mold from that one rotten cantaloupe produced 200 times more penicillin than Fleming's original discovery. Can you believe that? 200 times? That was it. That was the jackpot.
This was the key that finally unlocked mass production.
And the result of this massive industrial push was just staggering. By D-Day in June 1944, American factories were churning out 100 billion units of penicillin a month. This miracle drug was in the packs of medics hitting the beaches of Normandy, saving countless soldiers from infections that would have been a certain death sentence in any war before it.
But right in the middle of this incredible triumph, the man who started it all, Alexander Fleming, he issued a really chilling warning, a prophecy that, as it turns out, we are living through right now.
The very same year, he won the Nobel Prize for his discovery. He used his acceptance speech to warn the entire world. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if we misuse penicillin, if we use it too often, or in doses that are too small, the bacteria will, without a doubt, learn to resist it. He saw the future with terrifying clarity.
And, well, here we are, in 2026. Fleming's prophecy has absolutely come true. Decades of overprescription and overuse have created the exact thing he was afraid of: antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Or, as we call them now, superbugs. The miracle drug is losing its power.
So what's the big takeaway here? The legacy of penicillin is almost impossible to overstate. It added an average of 20 years to human life expectancy. Think about that. We are all part of generations who grew up without that constant looming fear of dying from a simple infection. And that is a luxury we are now in a very real fight to keep. Alexander Fleming's genius wasn't in making a mess. Lots of people do that. His genius was in his ability to look at a failure, a contaminated dish, and see a discovery. And that leads us with a really critical question for our time. As we face these new challenges, like superbugs, are we searching for answers with that same kind of open-minded curiosity? Or are we maybe too busy tidying up the very places where the next world-changing breakthrough might just be waiting to be found?